purpose of education. Do we have a definition of what's the meaning of a good education? Ask this interview.
We did not break that down, so we actually left it to the respondent to answer, again based on a scale. Yeah.
Could I get your comments on the project of nation building in Malaysia, especially with regard to the results of your research? Second is that would you consider in the future to do a research on race, perceptions on race, based on what is prescribed or ascribed by the state as opposed to how people identify themselves? Because I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s out of Javanese, and suddenly 70s, 80s I've become Malay.
I think that there are actually many academicians, not just in Malaysia, but outside of the country, who are doing very good literature, doing very good work on race and identity. With regards to actual grassroots survey and so on, that is certainly something that we can look into.
I think the nation building project is an ongoing project. I think there's a lot of people doing it. But at this point in time, I think our focus really is to firstly confirm the perceived inequality among the different ethnic groups. And I think we have shown that. The second target was to identify several policies of the government which really need to be changed. And without this kind of data, you only read in the papers, this is what the politicians say, the government cannot be held down. So at least now with the JPNI funding it and we pushing it through the JPNI, and then we had some discussions with them, at least we can hold them down and tell them that, look, these are the problems. So on that policy making level, this survey, this data, we identified the reasons for these problems. So nation building is such a large, idealistic, very, very nice word, but we really have to break it down and see where we can contribute. And from our perspective, the young lawyers and the CPPS, this we think was our contribution to that project. But of course, you can speak to Farish more and everybody else about different ideas on nation building.
Yes, sir. I think the lady was first, yeah.
It's a well-known fact that the Chinese and the Indians have been marginalized for the last 30 years. Is a universal truth. Now, it shows well in the statistics that you brought out, where the Indians are spoken. Now, the line of questions that you posed to the people interviewed was, to my mind, a little amateurish. Couldn't you have been more specific? Like, you could have asked them race, not whether you have been fairly treated or unfairly treated, because they have received everything on a platter for the last 50 years. Asking them whether you've been fairly treated is a ridiculous line of questioning. You could have been more specific by asking, why don't you want to get to a level playing field? Get out into the world and compete. That should be the line of questioning, not something so amateurish, because it just tells on the intelligence of the people interviewed too. The other thing being that, what is the objective of this research? How sure are you that this will not go into the archives of the ministry and go into oblivion? What steps will CPPS take to ensure that the ministry hears you out seriously and implements your suggestions? This is what I'm keen to know. Thank you.
Thank you. There are certain measures that need to be taken when one does research. The crafting of questions in questionnaires is a very important aspect. It's been covered in academic literature as well. We have to be very careful in wording the questions. So, for example, if we had asked the question, would you want a level playing field? That itself is a full-blown loaded question. It makes a lot of assumptions, which unfortunately as researchers we cannot do. as researchers, we need to be objective in asking questions, and the question was not whether they have been fairly treated, but it was whether they had been unfairly treated. And again, we needed to make sure that this covered other grounds as well. So it covered, have you been unfairly treated based on your gender? Of course, the women said yes. Race, religion, education level. So that's just a research perspective. About how this research is going to actually be effective in the long run. I think having public sessions such as this is actually important, because we know from the elections, for example, that governance of the country comes from the people. It comes from the media, the messages and the communication strategies that go out to the public that eventually make their leaders accountable. And so that's a bottoms-up approach. But from the top down, we have had 2 presentations with the Jabatan. We've had presentations with the Timbalan Menteri of the Prime Minister's office. It's the research study. This has also been tabled at the National Unity Panel. We have a National Unity Panel in the country that meets, every couple of months, and we have leaders pushing it on both ends. We have us here talking about it. We have members of the National Unity Panel trying to get the research done and distribute it to the rest. And how will we know whether this research is going to input into their policies in the long run? Again, that's for us to keep in check. We have to, informally, for example, ring them up and ask them what's happened to our report. Has the new minister read it, for example? Okay, and it depends, at which point the people want to gather together and use the websites and send it off to their friends and their constituents, leaders, their members of parliament. I think it's a holistic sort of perspective that we need to take into consideration. I think that politics, democracy, development in any nation has to embrace this holistic understanding of keeping leaders accountable. So I would say, everyone has a role to play in that.
Tricia, don't tell me that everything has got to be sensitive, like what the politicians have been saying all along the last 50 years, the divide and rule policy where don't touch this, it's sensitive, don't touch that, it's sensitive. You are advocating the same thing by telling me that the line of questioning is, should not be loaded. I don't know what you mean by that. You've got to speak the truth. You've got to put it to them. This is how it is. You've had it. If you're not sure of what I'm trying to tell you, read Raja Petra Kamarudin's research, which is